community. Thank you for being here, for letting us into your devices, and for being willing to enter the world of Tales of the Night. A world where anything is possible, and which is very, very close to you. Much closer than you dare to believe. If you believe in witches, for example, if that topic scares you, this episode might be quite strong for you. We recommend great discretion and not letting yourself be influenced by what you are about to hear. If it isn't a topic that particularly terrifies you, don't worry. It's nothing. Although, as always, I remind you that those who don't believe, those who go through life saying none of this exists, most often end up being the protagonists of their own horror story. So the time has come. Let yourself go. Turn off the light, if you can. And, for a moment, let the real world stay out there. Because you are now entering the following tales of the night. Do you believe in witches? I don't. I try not to believe it. Really. I try with all my might. But what happened to me, what I witnessed, makes it extremely difficult. I know many people who share their stories here with this community do so to know that someone else has experienced it too. They do it hoping that someone else will say, "Yes, I believe you. You're not crazy." Something similar happened to me. The paranormal exists. I think, on the contrary, the only thing I want is for someone to explain to me, maybe tell me I'm crazy, that it was all a misunderstanding, that nothing happened, that I can sleep peacefully at night. It happened 6 years ago, when I was 16, and I still can't get over it. I am very afraid to even go out to my backyard alone on Saturday nights. The same thing happened to my sister. She was 12 when it all happened. I think to explain everything well, I must tell you that my mom died when I was in 6th grade. Of course it was very sad, but she had a very long illness. The illness hurt us more than the death. When it happened, we were lucky to have a lot of close family around us and my dad, family that never left us alone. My aunts took turns coming to be with us so we could learn to cook. And I mean, my dad knows how to cook, but his job takes up too much of his time. And when Mom died, it seemed like there weren't many reasons for him to come home, as if he was afraid to be here, to remember her, to face her absence. He simply worked and worked and worked more. Finally, with time, he found a companion, someone who made him start living life again. Ironically, although it could have been expected otherwise, his new partner helped him reconnect with us, and we came to love her very much. Renata. Then something even more beautiful happened, at least for us. That announcement. We were going to have a little brother. That really changed our lives. He was much younger than my sister and me, of course, but I think that made it even nicer. We were already big enough, mature if you will, to enjoy it all, to help take care of him, to make plans, to feel no jealousy at all. They even let us choose his name. Mark. We chose it because that was the name of the boy at school we were all in love with, including my little sister. When my brother was 7 months old, however, the family received bad news again. The same illness that had taken my mother now attacked her younger sister, mercilessly. It brought her to the point where she couldn't do simple things in her house. But as I said, my family is very close-knit. Even my dad and us, in my mom's name, would go to support her whenever needed. We did it on Saturdays until the pain became simply unbearable. Being witnesses, seeing my aunt like that, Renata then decided on something. To be the one to take care of her husband's former sister-in-law. It was strange. It might be, yes, but my mom's family came to appreciate her a lot, and since she had some nursing knowledge, She seemed to be the ideal person, at least much more so than us. Also, I think they did it to protect my sister, my dad and me from the terrible memory, so we wouldn't relive what had happened with my mom. So on Saturdays, Renata would leave for the whole day. My dad, as always, worked, and my sister and I took care of the baby with the help of Kubo, Renata's dog, a stray dog that one day, when she was pregnant, accompanied her back home and stayed. He never left. He was extremely protective of her and, for some reason, intensely hated my sister's shoes. Since he was born and helped her take care of Mark, he always slept next to his crib. Always calm. Until one of those nights, when we were alone, something suddenly caught my attention. My sister was in the dining room, where she liked to sit and read. The baby was sleeping in my dad and Renata's room, where his crib was. The dog was with him as usual, but suddenly, something very strange happened. I swear, it felt like a silence enveloped the house, as if it had seeped inside, and you couldn't hear anything at all. No sounds from the street, no sounds from inside. Nothing, not even the ambient noise. I got up from the couch where I was sitting. I stood up, looking around. I don't know how to explain it. Nothing was happening, but I felt something very bad. It was so clear that my sister came over to me and asked if I could feel it too. I said yes, and we instinctively went to get my brother. When we entered the room, what we saw scared us a lot. Kubo was staring at the corner of the ceiling. He was just standing there, in an alert position, his tail stretched out like when he was about to bark angrily. He was right between the crib and whatever he seemed to be looking at, as if he was protecting it. My sister ran to grab the baby. She kept looking at the ceiling. I looked up at that corner too, and felt something. There was nothing visible, but there was something there. Something that made it impossible for me to keep looking. I had to lower my gaze. As best as I could, I took the baby out of the room too. We all went to the living room and stayed there until my dad came home. He took us out to dinner for hamburgers. We asked him to take us to a place where they allowed dogs because we didn't want to leave Kubo behind. Not that night. Afterward, we picked up Renata from my aunt's house. My dad didn't let us go in to see her. We waited in the car. I guess for the moment, we forgot about the strange feeling we had at home. It was easy to do. Because we didn't understand it. Because we couldn't explain it. But the following Saturday it continued. Kubo would go out to the yard every night, even though he had a bed inside. Some days he would scratch at the door to go out and lie under a tree near the entrance, like he remembered his days of living on the streets. That Saturday, he woke up in bad shape. It seemed like something was hurting him. He wouldn't get up. We found a bag of what looked like old, almost rotten entrails in the yard, as if he had gone out and found them, or someone had thrown them in for him to eat. They took him to the vet, who managed to get most of it out. Still, he told us Kubo had to stay for observation. They dropped my siblings and me back home. Then my dad took Renata to my aunt's house before going to work. When we got home, a neighbor approached and asked about Kubo. We told her what had happened, and she just told us to take good care of him, so he wouldn't be poisoned. She said she had seen something early in the morning, before 4. When she went out to see her husband off to work, they always got up that early. She said they saw a woman standing near our wall. She seemed to be saying something from inside. They saw her lips moving. When she heard the car door open, she turned, and then walked down the street until she disappeared. She said the woman walked very strangely. She was wearing a black dress with a very wide bottom, like something from the Victorian era or something like that. And as she walked away, she held the bottom of the dress with her hands. The width and length made it look like she was floating, because you couldn't see her feet moving. Of course, hearing this made us uneasy. But to be completely honest, it seemed like the act of a woman who was mentally disturbed. We didn't connect it at all with what had happened the previous Saturday. There was no reason to. And, as usual, we went on with our activities. I think Saturdays, despite taking care of my brother, had become days where each of us focused on our own things, either to do homework, which we never did on Sundays, or if we had free time, we'd read or watch a series we had pending. I settled in the living room with the baby. My sister was on the couch across from me reading while I was looking for something to watch on TV. I don't know when I fell asleep. I never usually take naps, but that afternoon, I fell asleep, almost without realizing it. I slept deeply. My sister later told me that when she saw me like that, she turned off the TV. She left the baby in his crib with the door open and went to read in the dining room. I don't know how much time passed. My brother's crying entered my dreams. Little by little, I was dreaming terrible things. I dreamed of a black shadow that entered the room where he was, dancing around him, and I couldn't do anything. But in the dream, I was lying very far from there, far from the house. I was on a bench in a park my dad used to take us to when we were little, when we lived somewhere else. I was very scared, and that's when I realized it was a dream. But the seconds made me realize something worse. If what I was seeing was a dream, the crying was real. It was outside, but I couldn't wake up. I struggled. I don't remember how I did it, but I struggled, moving little by little until I fell off the couch. I realized I was in my living room. The baby's crying was coming from the room, and as I got up, I yelled at my sister why she wasn't going to check on him. She looked up from her book, surprised, asking what was going on, and while I was talking, she said the baby was crying. She ran after me, telling me she hadn't heard him, that until that precise moment, she hadn't heard him crying. The door was closed. I was afraid it wouldn't open, that it was locked, that someone was inside with him. But thank heaven it wasn't. We opened it and ran to the crib. It was empty. The crying continued, and we started looking everywhere until we realized it seemed to be coming from that corner. Kubo had been staring at the previous Saturday, the one we dared not look at. More precisely, it was coming from above the wardrobe, a huge wardrobe that was under that corner. My sister ran for a chair, and we set it up. I climbed up to feel above the wardrobe with my hands. She couldn't reach it. Finally, I felt the baby. I felt his little arm. I carefully pulled him down as best as I could. My sister kept crying, repeatedly telling me she really hadn't heard him, that he hadn't been crying. We ran out and went to the neighbor across the street, the one who had seen the woman that night. She wasn't the one we got along with best or trusted the most, but for some reason, she was the one I thought we could tell about what had just happened. Since we ran out without phones or anything, we couldn't tell my dad that we had left, and we stayed there. When he arrived with Renata, the neighbor went to talk to them. She asked to go first, saying she had something to tell them. Then we came out with the baby, still scared. I don't know what the neighbor said, but it didn't help. I think it made things worse. My dad was a bit upset. He asked us what had happened, but He said no lies, no stories. We didn't know what to say. Renata asked us if we couldn't stay alone, if having so much responsibility with the baby was too much to tell them. But we wanted to help. We wanted to keep helping. And deep down, I didn't want to believe what was happening. Neither did my sister. We had never believed in paranormal phenomena, and we were not religious at all. Not even during the worst moments of my mom's illness had we sought solace in faith. One more Saturday was left. A worse one. No, a more terrible one. The last Saturday, my sister and I endured being alone. This time we were very aware of what could happen. All week we were nervous about Saturday, a nervousness that increased every day as the day approached. We were nervous about being alone again, and that day we prepared. Kubo had been back with us for a few days, but he was still very weak, sick. He just lay down to sleep in front of the baby, but it didn't seem like he could really protect him. We settled in my room, the one with the safest window. We put the baby in the corner farthest from the door. We spent the whole afternoon like that. We even ate there. When my dad arrived, we felt a bit of relief. He arrived early and it seemed the bad moment had passed. He started making us dinner. We asked about Renata, and he said she had stayed with my aunt, that she had had a very bad day, and it seemed like it could be one of the last. More family had arrived there, but Renata said she would stay a while longer, that someone would bring her home later, that he shouldn't go over there. I think she wanted to stay because of her nursing knowledge. She thought she could help. After dinner, my dad took the baby and went to the living room. Kubo followed, barely walking, and lay down beside the couch. My sister and I wanted to rest. She went to her room and I went to mine. It was already late. I felt like the day was over. I was getting ready to sleep when something startled me. I heard my sister run out of her room. Kubo was barking desperately at the door, and for some reason, my dad opened it. The dog shot out, crying and barking angrily, and somehow, despite his injuries, he squeezed through the bars, where I never imagined he could fit. And so, he escaped into the street. My father was very surprised. He shouted that he was going to run after him, and that we should take care of the baby. I knew I had to go on my bike to help, or he would be lost forever, or reach the intersection of the two avenues near our house and surely get hit by a car. I told my sister to lock herself in with the baby and not to let anyone see her. Then I ran out to look for the dog. I caught up with my dad on the bike. We each went a different way because neither of us had seen where Kubo ran. I searched desperately, going around and around. I realized I had gone out without my phone when I touched the back pocket of my pants, where I always kept it. By reflex, I tried to pull it out to call my dad, to ask if he had seen Kubo, but I didn't have it. Then it hit me that something had driven us out of the house. Something had done something to the dog. My little sister and the baby were alone. Forgive me, Kubo, I thought, and hurried back home. I pedaled with all my strength until I couldn't anymore. As I approached, nearing home, I was very scared to see people in the street outside. A small group of people. I realized it was my dad arriving. The neighbor was there too. Renata was nervous with the baby in her arms, accompanied by my aunt, Aura, my mom's eldest brother's wife. She had brought her home. Especially my sister and the neighbor, who were completely pale, and I approached them. I wanted them to explain what had happened, and felt they were the only ones who truly knew. The only ones who would tell me. The neighbor told me what she saw before my dad arrived. Something she hadn't dared to say because of how they had reacted to what she tried to tell them the week before. She said there was a woman on the roof of our house, She was almost sure it was the same woman in black she had seen outside the night Kubo got sick. She said she didn't want to tell my dad and didn't know how to warn us. So the only thing she could do was keep an eye on it, see if it moved, if it came down, if it did anything. The truth is, she was also very respectful of these matters. She was very afraid of these women, of witches. After a while, she saw the dog running out. She saw him running terrified into the street and knew something very bad was happening. Then my dad ran out, and then I came out on my bike. That's when she knew that no matter how nosy a neighbor she may seem, she had to do something. She knew that only my sister and the baby were in the house. The strangest thing was that as she approached, when she got to my house, she saw the baby asleep, lying at the front door. My sister was inside, screaming for him, looking for him. The neighbor quickly picked him up and shouted to my sister that she had him, that he was in her arms and was almost right in front of her, but she couldn't see him. And as soon as she lifted the baby, he started crying. Both of them ran out, and luckily Renata was arriving just then. She got out of the car very scared and took the baby. A screech. A strange sound came from the roof of the house. There. The four of them managed to see a figure in black. A woman, or her silhouette with glowing eyes. A woman who soon hid and disappeared from sight, as if she had jumped to the back of the house. But no one dared to go check. My sister says she doesn't have many memories of that moment, only that I told her to take the baby. But she couldn't find him anywhere. She didn't put him there. Renata started spending more and more time at her mom's house, with my brother. The idea that the woman might come back terrified her. My dad insisted these were ignorant people's beliefs, and nothing more. Kubo never came back. Over time, neither did Renata, nor my little brother. We see them rarely. It's hard to be around him as a child, but we try to be there whenever my dad sees him. Once again, it's just the three of us, but we're together, sharing our solitude. As far as I know, my brother hasn't been baptized, despite all the advice. Almost 2 years later, while visiting a friend in a nearby neighborhood, we found Kubo in a little house, playing with a girl. It was obvious that he lived there now, that he was happy. We got a little closer, and he recognized us. He came to us happily, wagging his tail. But then the girl called him, and he went back to her, positioning himself between the little girl and us, between the little girl and the street. We understood that he was now protecting her. That has always been Kubo's mission. That's why we didn't say anything. That's why we left him there. Although we like to visit from time to time to see him, to give him a treat that he loved so much. Unfortunately, we can't forget those nights when that woman visited us on the roof. Every now and then, always on Saturdays, when we've gone to bed. If we pay attention, we can still hear her, as if she's still searching. I suppose it's better that she's here above, in this house. I suppose it's better that she doesn't know where they took Mark. Thank you very much for continuing with this episode. I hope you're enjoying it. If you're not afraid of witches, we hope you still liked the previous story. But now, it's time to continue. We have one more story tonight. Hello, my name is Alma. I just started listening to you recently. From the first episode, I was convinced I had to tell you about some of the many misfortunes I've had with the paranormal, or some of the stories my grandmother used to tell me while grinding salsa in the mortar, taking the opportunity to tell me legends. She talked a lot about La Rumorosa, because my grandmother traveled many times, from León, Guanajuato, to Tijuana. And of course, she always passed through there. Among so many dangerous stretches, so many lonely roads, none compared to what is said about that area. Grandmother used to say that when they arrived, the adults would fall silent, that the car would start to get very cold, and that everyone was afraid of encountering one of the legends told about that slope. And eventually, it happened to them. Among all the stories told there, perhaps the most terrifying is the woman who appears hitchhiking. If you lose sight of her, she climbs into your car, and you suddenly see her in the passenger seat or in the rearview mirror. She is blamed for hundreds of accidents involving buses, passenger vehicles, trucks, and private cars. My grandmother says that she and her parents had a close encounter with this ghost, with this apparition. In those days, the road was even more dangerous than it is now. It was just one lane down and one lane up, and in some sections, it was filled with crosses left for those who died in accidents. When she was little and passed through there with her sister, both in the back seat, the only thing they could do to pass the time, to try not to be scared, was to count the crosses out loud. She told me that on one occasion, just as it was getting dark, not yet completely night, they were counting crosses while their parents were silent in the front seat. 22, 23, 24, 25, 25, 25. Suddenly she realized that her sister had stopped responding, that she had stopped counting with her. She turned to see what was wrong with her. She was in a daze, unable to speak. My grandmother asked her, "What's wrong? Why aren't you counting? Why are you like this?" She got angry with her, thinking she wanted to scare her, and even hit her to get her to respond. Her father turned to look at them in the mirror, to scold them. He managed to break. Her sister came with a scream, seemingly because they were about to go off the cliff, like so many other unfortunate ones. Her father got out and hugged her sister. He checked them both. Everything seemed to be fine. Her sister wouldn't stop crying. And finally she said why. She said that when she was counting crosses, suddenly, behind one of them, there was a woman standing, watching the car pass, looking directly at her. She knew it wasn't normal because the woman was completely covered in blood. Her father hugged her, tried to calm her, and then kept driving to quickly get out of La Rumorosa. When they finally got to Tecate, they stopped to rest for a moment. There, my grandmother's father told her mother something the girls wouldn't know for a long time. He said that when the grandmother hit her sister, and he turned to look at them, he saw both of them covered in blood, with their little faces disfigured, as if they had been in a terrible accident. At that moment, the grandmother's mother didn't completely believe her husband, until much later, when they were told that it does happen. They were told about the bloody woman who causes so many accidents there. She continues to take lives in revenge because her life was taken from her, precisely in that place,